Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today we are interviewing one of the authors of Servants of Stone, Sean Eads. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Yeah, well, my name is Sean. Has been established. I have written a few novels in my career. I've been a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award and the Shirley Jackson Award and the Colorado Book Award. I live in Denver, Colorado. Uh, my day job, I'm a librarian and the program coordinator for the Jefferson County Public Library.
Yeah, and excellent. We love librarians.
Hope so.
Yes, when I was growing up, library was my second home. So yeah, definitely love the librarians. So give everybody an overview of what your novel Servants of Stone is about that you've co-written with Josh Viola. So
Yeah, I mean, Josh and I do a lot of co-writing together on projects. Servants of Stone is a historical dark fantasy novel. I think that's the best way to describe it. It begins in about 1820, appropriately on a dark and stormy night, where what happens is you have a young man who quite accidentally saves a baby that's on its way to be sacrificed to a witch. Unfortunately for the baby, the rescuer happens to be a bit of a ruffian himself, so he continues and takes the baby onto the witch and uses it as a negotiating tactic to kind of get what he wants in exchange for giving the baby over. And so the witch grants him basically his own town, his own little mini kingdom right in America called New Vineland. And as the town grows, it becomes very obvious that something is very, very wrong with the place. For one, there's a gigantic stone, almost fairy tale tower growing up right out of the middle of it. And it seems to be sending out some sort of signal or song that appeals to people's more venal impulses, and it draws them in. And once, kind of like Hotel California, once you're in New Vineland, you can't ever leave, really. But the witch's diabolical plan is foiled when a very young, good-hearted British traveler shows up and is incorruptible. And the town has no charms for him at all, but he becomes determined to figure out the mystery behind it. And once he learns its sort of evil underpinnings, he forms a team to help bring it down.
okay, so what were the inspirations behind the book?
This one is unusual for us because when I write with Josh, we're usually hashing out a plan together, a plot and characters. In this particular case, he had already written a full novel which he'd called Servants of Stone. And I've known Josh probably for 12 years or so at this point. He had never mentioned this manuscript. And he had actually been living with the story, I mean, I think since he was in his early 20s. Josh is an illustrator, a really good graphic artist in his own right, and began to show me that he had made designs for all of these characters. And but he was not happy with the novel as he wrote it. There were things about it that he just didn't feel were working. And so initially he gave it to me for my feedback. And I was quite taken with a lot of the characters. I just didn't like the way that it was structured all that well. And also because it is a historical novel, it's a historical novel that didn't actually feel as it was. It didn't feel like it was really rooted in, it didn't feel like you were really in the early 19th century to me. So we started talking out how things might change a little bit and how we might introduce a few new characters and how a couple of the established characters might evolve. And we went from there. But yeah, very different in the fact that he had like a 400-page manuscript. I mean, a full idea in his head. And so we just kind of went from that and reshaped it a little bit.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about some of the characters.
it's got characters that I love as much as any novel I've ever done, either with Josh or solo. The first one, and I think my favorite character, is actually a horse that's called Night Camp. And Night Camp is probably he starts life as just a regular horse, and then the witch character decides to elevate him magically, elevates him in intelligence, elevates him in strength and in life, in longevity. But in order to have these things, he has to become basically the witch's servant and participate in a bunch of really horrible deeds, which over the course of more than a century of his life, he comes to regret. And so he ends up he has a major sort of redemption arc as he becomes sort of the intellectual force behind the people that are going to overthrow the witch and the sinister town. There is a endearing river monster named Toad, who isn't quite evil, but think of Toad as like a toddler almost, who doesn't really have much of an understanding of the world, and becomes very, very aggressive and angry when he doesn't understand something and when things aren't going his way. And at the same time, he just desperately wants to appease and be loved by his mother, who is the witch in this character. He has a very a unique speaking style that was kind of hard to write, and also when it comes to you're writing in his narrative, you're writing it through someone who doesn't have the same frame of references that we do as readers, not at all. And so you're having to work within those narrow confines and yet still make the narrative work. There is the English explorer Harold Goodman, who is like just the good old fashioned British adventurer who has sort of the heart of gold and is naive in his own way. But it's just desperately, he himself has sort of father issues. His father is back in England and was like a church pastor. But this fellow has decided, I don't really believe in God, but maybe he actually does believe in God more than he originally thought he did. And so that's part of his arc, is this sort of begrudging coming to faith in his own way. So I think you've got a lot of multifaceted characters. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't add Lily, who is the little girl character who's about 10 years old. I have never written from the viewpoint of a little girl before. But she is discovering her own innate magical abilities, and she has a lot of strength of character. She's really, in many ways, the driving force of the novel.
Yeah, I think the book has an interesting title. Do you know how Josh came up with that?
I do, and I don't want to go into it too much because the meaning of the title has changed a little bit from his version to what we actually have published here. But he was thinking of it entirely or largely in the sense of like gargoyles, like animated gargoyles they are literally servants of stone. And I think now stone has a little bit more of it's got that original very literal element to it too, but there's also, since there's like a god of stone, literally, that the witch worships now. And there's also the sense of like stoniness of the heart or stoniness of the spirit, and people that are basically not serving humanity the way that they might, at least at the beginning.
So it's got multiple facets to it.
I hope so.
So this is a supernatural horror book and a historical horror book. So how much research did you guys get into with folklore and historical things?
The magical system is largely just our own creation, but it does involve song in many ways. So we were thinking of, you think like the Lorelei and the siren song, and and those sorts of elements. But the historical, because it's a historical novel, that's really where the focus of the research is. because it gets into, who was the president at the time. In fact, Andrew Jackson is the president in the time period that this story is set. And Andrew Jackson ends up playing a very major role in the plot. But things like, how did people kind of go upriver if they're up on the Mississippi? How did they do that in 1830? All those kinds of things were really what the digging deep through the internet and encyclopedias and etc. were more about, versus as opposed to sort of researching the supernatural.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that feeling of supernatural, not supernatural, but historical research. You can spend days on that.
Oh yeah, you always discover, really interesting things, for sure.
Yeah, and on the littlest things sometimes too, because if you've got a scene with like I had a scene where someone was searching a cabinet, and I had to research the cabinets at the time period to see if they had cupboards or drawers to see
Yes,
what he
yes.
was searching through. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, something as innocent as someone bent down to tie their shoelaces, and it's like, no, at that time period they didn't have shoelaces; they had buckles, and those little things. Or whether somebody gets sort of obsessed with that level of minutia or not, but you are trying to be period accurate for sure.
Mm. So, are there any themes or messages that you consciously set out to explore in the book?
Um, Innocence, guilt, and then multiple characters have kind of long running and parallel redemption arcs. Those are kind of the biggest character, or the biggest kind of character traits going on, and thematically. With Lily, the young girl, there's very much a coming of age story built in with her, and also discovering truths about mom and dad, truths about family that they have tried to keep hidden, regrets, that sort of thing. Those I think are primarily the driving force thematically of the novel.
Okay, so what's your favorite scene in this story without spoilers?
Uh, where the river monster Toad discovers who he really is. He learns his actual identity and the broader scope, his broader importance to the other characters, who themselves are only discovering who he is.
Okay, so when the two of you started collaborating, did you have any difficulties with writing the novel, or does any scenes or characters give you trouble?
It was, as we restructured it, it's a common problem, I think, for novelists, that you keep discovering that you have more and more story to actually tell. You make one little change, or you discover some aspect of a character, and it's like, no, that has to be fleshed out, and then you have to, build the connective tissue. The tale that grows in the telling, is that the phrase maybe Tolkien used, or maybe it precedes that. So what happened was, I think the manuscript that Josh had was something like 80,000 words. And then we together kind of rewrote it, and we made it about 100,000 words. And we looked at it, and we were both dissatisfied, because we're like, there's like another 25,000 words in this story that, we have to put in to make this work, to give it, so it doesn't feel rushed. And so, but we were also thinking just in terms of practicalities, in terms of like wanting to sell this book. It's like, the longer it gets, the harder it is maybe to be marketed. But we went ahead and did it, and we were quite satisfied with it at 125,000 words. Then we got it represented with an agent. And the agent said, we need to cut out 25,000 words. So we were like going back now, trying to figure out, well, how do we get back to the 100,000 mark while keeping in all the connective tissue that we really, really liked? So there was a lot of back and forth there. And I think once it was finally sold, it went into like 105,000 words. So there was that was really more of of logistically almost in the writing, the issue there of just like, all right, reining in the story versus letting it breathe, that sort of thing. I think I mentioned Toad, the river monster. I mean, he has a very peculiar way of speaking. And I mean, if you almost think of like Solomon Grundy from the DC comics, he sounds a little bit like that. I mean, he sounded like that very much in my head. And on one hand, you're thinking, I don't mind this, but how much of this is going to become a real test of the reader's patience? Are they willing to go along with this, or do they start rolling their eyes, pretty quickly, or maybe even shutting the book off, or closing the page? So those were considerations, but we just rolled with it.
Yeah. Some of those characters, they teeter on whether or not the readers will love or hate them, don't they? If they can become annoying.
Very fun, very much so.
So, what do you think readers will enjoy most about your novel?
I mean, personally, I think that they'll find the redemption arcs really rewarding. Those were really rewarding, certainly for me to write. I hope that they like certainly all the characters and the interactions between. There are some characters I haven't talked about. There's an older sailor character who befriends the young British adventurer, and I really, really enjoy their camaraderie. There's a big age difference between them, but they kind of become best friends, and it's like it's that early 19th century, the full-on American patriot, and then sort of the British guy, and it's like there's playful tension that they play up between their nationalities there. I think that the readers will really like that.
Okay, so what's your greatest challenge as a writer?
Getting into the head of a character, and depending upon the character. I mean, you always say that there's no character who is maybe like a little bit a part of you, and that's very true. But if you're going to say, okay, I need to write believably from the standpoint of a 10-year-old girl, and I'm a 52-year-old man, I'm not, it's like, how do I make this convincing? What do I do? So those can be challenges. But I've always viewed myself as a character-oriented writer versus a plot-oriented writer. And so the thoughts and the feelings of the characters are what end up driving the action. It's supposed to spring from that, or at least that's what I hope it does, as opposed to just imposing action this story is going to happen this way regardless of what the characters do. So doing that correct act of ventriloquy where you can impersonate a character proper, and moving between very, very different characters. It's ironic. The character that I probably identified the most with and was easiest to write was Night Horse, or Nightmare the horse. Even though this is a non-human character, but it's a very, very smart character that feels like it has a master's degree in English lit, and it's like, oh, I can easily slide right into this character, as opposed to like I'm impersonating a farmer now, or I'm impersonating the river monster or the witch for that matter. So that's the most difficult thing for me, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your writing process like? Do you have a certain routine to get yourself into the flow of writing?
For years, I was your typical 1,000, 2,000 word a day, start writing at 6 a.m., get done by 8 a.m. or so, and then go to work. Over the last really 6 or 7 years, I kind of feel like I've become, for lack of a better term, a burst writer, where there might be one day where I write 5,000 or 6,000 words. Just I don't have much, for whatever reason, it's just all flowing. But then I might go 6 or 7 days without writing anything at all. I can't explain that change in the slightest. but that's just the way that it's been, and it's still working for me. I think having, I mean, we're talking decades of having that 1,000, 2,000 words a day, discipline. I know that I can go back to it. I mean, I know that I can write and finish a book if I need to. So I don't worry if I'm technically like, oh, if I were thinking like I should be writing 1 to 2,000 words a day at this third week of the month, I should be at, 30,000 words, and I'm actually only at 12,000 words, say. That doesn't bother me at all because I know that I can still finish this project and I can play catch up if if I need to. If you're just thinking purely along the lines of linear progression. Otherwise, I have different routines of rewriting versus writing, in which draft that I'm doing. Like if I'm like when you get to that third draft where I'm thinking more about trying to focus on, sentence by sentence, making the flow greater, the correct word, or trying to be a little fancy with the language or whatever. Before I sit down to write, I'll usually like read some of my favorite poetry or something. Ideally poetry from the time period. So like this, I might be reading some Lord Byron or Wordsworth or something like that, just to kind of get me into the rhythm of language, the cadences of language in the time period. But that really that's something for like when I'm rewriting and focusing more on the syntax versus, that first draft where I'm writing as discovery. I haven't necessarily plotted anything out. I might know a few things about the characters, but there's all this rich backstory that's just sort of evolving for me that I feel like I'm uncovering as I go along. And then when you get, of course, into the second draft, to me, all the magic of writing is in the second draft, the magic of the storytelling, because it's not the writing, it's the rewriting that makes everything so perfect. And, if your first draft isn't any good at all, you've kind of got the nice picture and all the pieces where they should be. It's just like a jigsaw that hasn't quite been put together yet. And so part two, the second draft starts adding all that and making it really nice and precise.
Yeah, definitely the rewriting is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
So, what authors have inspired you or motivated you?
Oh, I mean, as a kid, it was definitely Ray Bradbury was huge. Stephen King was huge. As I got into high school, my taste went a little bit more literary. I'm from Kentucky, so I was reading like a lot of Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor. Um, Later on in high school, Chris Offutt, Bobby Ann Mason. Those are all writers that were pretty important to me. Hemingway certainly is important to me. Yeah, those would be the primary ones. Cormac McCarthy, I admire a lot. I have a love-hate relationship with Cormac McCarthy. I'm awed by everything that he's done. At the same time, I start rolling my eyes a little bit as I read him from time to time. So I'm completely envious of just some of the things that he gets away with doing. But it's one of those cases where the person that you're reading can so overpower your own voice that you get immersed into them, and then you start trying to imitate them almost unconsciously. And so I find that it's like, oh, I need to read something trashy just to get that out of my way, so I can go back and find me. Where's Sean in all this writing? Because Sean's trying to imitate Cormac McCarthy, and it's going to come off as terrible.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with an occasional trashy read.
No. I mean, Servants of Stone, you can find it on your.
Okay, so speaking of reads, is there anything special on your to read list this year?
No, I don't think so. I'm slowly making my way through Percival Everett's James right now, and like I said, most people can probably read that book in a day to 2 days tops, and I don't know why it's taking me so long, but it just is. I'm enjoying it. I seem to be only reading a couple of pages a day, but that's one thing I don't like to read actually while I'm doing writing projects. I like to read in between writing projects, but the problem right now is that I'm on about 7 different writing projects. So there just hasn't been much leeway for me to sit down and just immerse myself in somebody else's story, for good or bad.
I'd never get any reading done if I waited between projects. I got too many of them going on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so what are you currently working on, and what's next for you?
I am working on 2 novels at the moment. One's basically a vampire novel, a gay themed vampire novel that's kind of like Near Dark, if you know that movie. It's kind of got those sort of elements. The other one is a stab at kind of a young adult fantasy novel, kind of based around the concept of Little Red Riding Hood, and storytelling and like the literal power of storytelling in this particular case. I'll have a new novel, I think, out later this year that's more of like literary, and that's about kind of based on the life of Ernest Hemingway. I mentioned Hemingway earlier. I mean, so I like his work, and I'm fascinated by the struggles and the triumphs and the ultimate sadness, I think, of his life. Josh and I together are writing for a variety of video game properties and graphic novels, which not to be mysterious, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to discuss because of non-disclosure agreements, frankly, but it's been very interesting, kind of weird bucket list sorts of things. And we also have the second volume of a comic book that we do for a local haunted house attraction called Terror in the Corn. That will be coming out in October.
Yeah, well, sounds like we have a lot to look forward to from both of you. So,
So
well, hopefully we'll see it all soon. Anyway, that's it for this interview. Thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
thank you. You as well.
And that's it for this episode. And bye for now.